It was a one-word sentence that changed Donald Trump's life. He wasn't expecting to hear that word yesterday. At 4:15 p.m., Judge Juan Merchan told defendant Donald Trump and his lawyers and the prosecutors in the courtroom, quote, "I'm going to excuse the jury about 4:30. We'll give them a few more minutes, and then we'll excuse them." Donald Trump's defense lawyer, Todd Blanche, said, "All right," and the judge said, "I'm going to step out for a few minutes." The conventional courtroom wisdom, for a variety of reasons, is the longer a jury deliberates, the better it is for the defense. And so Donald Trump and Todd Blanche were nearly giddy that the jury was going to go home for a second day without reaching a verdict.
Donald Trump thought that he was going home without a verdict today. He just had about 15 minutes to kill. And what we saw was a Donald Trump at that verdict, at the defense table, that we have never seen before. He was joking, he was laughing, he was smiling with Todd Blanche. They were chatting, they were laughing almost incessantly. Todd Blanche laughing so hard at one point, doubling over that his forehead almost touched the table in front of him. They thought that they were going home today. It seemed without a verdict. It was almost a jubilant, giddy Donald Trump, but that changed very, very quickly when Judge Merchan came back into the room to inform the parties that the jury had reached that verdict.
The jury had a verdict after only 9 hours of deliberation, which is not a long deliberation for a 34-count indictment of this complexity level. And so Donald Trump watched his jury enter the courtroom for what would be the final time. The jury walked by him, as they always did, at high speed, never looking at him, never looking at anyone else, just filing straight ahead, focused on the job they took an oath to do. There is no suspense like a jury verdict, nothing like it. We have taken the suspense out of so much of modern life. We have polls telling us who's going to win elections. We have computers tracking exactly where hurricanes are going to go. We can know the gender of our babies before they are born. There are websites devoted to predicting the chances of who's going to win which Oscar. And as prediction has become easier, suspense has become much more rare. In the entire history of the dramatic arts, from Shakespeare to Spielberg, no dramatist has been able to deliver to an audience the force of the impact a jury verdict has in the room as it hits just when the suspense feels unbearable. I've seen lives crushed in an instant by a jury verdict. I've seen people sent off to the electric chair by one word, guilty. And I've seen lives saved by a jury verdict. Winning the lottery has nothing on the words not guilty for a criminal defendant. Every announcement of every jury verdict leaves everyone in the courtroom dizzy, no matter which verdict they were hoping for. It's hard to trust your ears when you hear that verdict. Did he really say what I thought he said? Is what speeds through the minds of everyone who has just heard that verdict. The world slows down, and you experience the passage of time in thousandths of a second, so that if there is another count of the indictment, it always seems like the announcement of a second verdict comes a very long time after that first verdict. And if both of those verdicts are the same, only then do you just begin to believe your ears. That's when you hear the crying. That's when you hear the mothers crying for their sons who have just been convicted. I was a teenager when I heard a wife crying for her husband who had just been convicted of murder. I had many conversations with her during that trial. I can't remember the sound of her voice, but I will never forget the sound of her crying when she heard that verdict. And if there is a third verdict, only then does your mood brighten, if it's the verdict you wanted to hear. But if it's the verdict you don't want to hear, and if you're the defendant, by the third verdict, you're in the darkest place you have ever been in your life. Your eyes may be open, but you cannot see, you cannot feel, you cannot understand what is happening to you, and you begin to feel the greatest fear you've ever felt in your life about what is going to happen to you. For 2 full minutes yesterday, the worst 2 minutes of Donald Trump's life, Donald Trump listened to his jury verdict, delivered by the foreperson of the jury who moved to this country from Ireland and still has an Irish accent that was last heard in the courtroom when he was answering questions as a prospective juror 6 weeks ago. There were no screams of anguish, as you sometimes hear at jury verdicts. No one cried. The current Mrs. Trump wasn't there. Eric Trump was the only family member present, and if he has feelings for his father, they once again went unexpressed. The only thing defendant Donald J. Trump heard in the courtroom when the torturous suspense finally broke was this. The clerk: "How say you to the first count of the indictment charging Donald J. Trump with the crime of falsifying business records in the first degree? Guilty or not guilty?" Juror number 1, guilty. "How say you to count 2? Guilty. How say you to count 3? Guilty. How say you to count 4? Guilty. How say you to count 5? Guilty. How say you to count 6? Guilty. How say you to count 7? Guilty. How say you to count 8? Guilty. How say you to count 9? Guilty. How say you to count 10? Guilty. How say you to count 11? Guilty. How say you to count 12? Guilty. How say you to count 13? Guilty. How say you to count 14? Guilty. How say you to count 15? Guilty. How say you to count 16? Guilty. How say you to count 17? Guilty. How say you to count 18? Guilty. How say you to count 19? Guilty. How say you to count 20? Guilty. How say you to count 21? Guilty. How say you to count 22? Guilty. How say you to count 23? Guilty. How say you to count 24? Guilty. How say you to count 25? Guilty. How say you to count 26? Guilty. How say you to count 27? Guilty. How say you to count 28? Guilty. How say you to count 29? Guilty. How say you to count 30? Guilty. How say you to count 31? Guilty. How say you to count 32? Guilty. How say you to count 33? Guilty. And how say you to count 34? Guilty. The clerk, please be seated. 34 times. 34 times. Just half an hour earlier, Donald Trump was laughing with his lawyer, laughing as he had never laughed before. And then he had to listen to the word he hoped he would never hear 34 times. He had to listen to that word 34 times because 12 people, randomly chosen from the 1.6 million people living on the island of Manhattan raised their right hand and answered yes to this question. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that you will try the case of the people of the state of New York against Donald J. Trump in a fair and impartial manner, and to the best of your ability, render a true verdict according to the law and evidence? I watched that jury paying much more attention to every word of testimony than Donald Trump did. I watched that jury paying much more attention to every word the lawyers on both sides said than Donald Trump did. I watched that jury never close their eyes in that courtroom the way Donald Trump did for hours on end. I watched that jury respect what was happening in that room more, much more, than Donald Trump ever could.
The only voice that matters is the voice of the jury, and the jury has spoken.
Back with us, Adam Klasfeld, Lisa Rubin, and Andrew Weissmann. So, Donald Trump, I've been saying, forever, Donald Trump will never testify in his own defense in a criminal trial because he obviously would commit perjury. If he did that, he'd also be a terrible witness. He would be found guilty, absolutely, based on his own testimony. Today, Donald Trump agreed with me, and he admitted he didn't testify in this case because he would have committed perjury. Let's listen to Donald Trump say that.
Now, I would have testified. I wanted to testify. The theory is you never testify because as soon as you testify, anybody, if it were George Washington, don't testify because they'll get you on something that you said slightly wrong and then they sue you for perjury.
Okay, Donald, first of all, George Washington did testify. He testified against himself to his father when he was 6 years old, said, "I cannot tell a lie. I chopped down the tree." Andrew Weissmann, we're going to hear this for as long as Donald Trump is able to speak, and we will hear it in every other one of his criminal trials about how he wanted to testify.
Donald Trump had a right to testify. Judge Merchan made sure he knew it because early in the trial, when Donald Trump was saying because of the gag order he could not testify, Juan Merchan wanted to make sure that Donald Trump, the former president of the United States, understood the rights that any defendant has. And it is a right that is personal to the defendant. It is not a right that is exercised by defense counsel, as all of those defense counsel know. And that is, it is the defendant's choice to testify or not to testify. So it is simply a lie if he says I was, prohibited from testifying or I wanted to testify. If he wanted to, he could hop on the stand and testify. He could have called Keith Schiller if he wanted to. He could have called Alan Weisselberg in the same way he made a choice to call Bob Costello. Not the best choice in the world, given how that went. He also was free to cross-examine David Pecker and to say he was a liar. He did not. David Pecker was, as Lisa said, was close to the defendant. He was a key witness. He could have cross-examined Hope Hicks and said she was a liar. He did not. She provided equally damning testimony. The same thing for Jeff McConney, and on and on. What are all of those witnesses who did testify have in common? They were all people loyal to and aligned with Donald Trump. So for the people who say this was a witch hunt and it's unfair and it's a sham, these are Donald Trump's friends and allies and employees who testified. They were not even claimed to be lying by Donald Trump. And he had a choice to testify and to call witnesses in addition to Bob Costello, and he chose not to.
So it's one thing for Donald Trump to say something as absurd as that. It's something else when Donald Trump's lead defense lawyer, Todd Blanche, goes on CNN And we're going to show you what he said. You know, he had a tough time in the courtroom because he had bad facts. He's having an even worse time on television. Todd Blanche, by the way, has a permanent invitation to come on this program whenever he possibly can to answer questions about this and the other Trump cases. Let's listen to what he said, what Todd Blanche said on CNN.
Why didn't the defense call any of these witnesses?
Well, because we happen to live in America and we don't have the burden of proof. And so there's not, that's not the point. That's a question that is a loaded question that should not be asked of a defense attorney or a defendant. The question that we asked the jury, and they ultimately obviously got passed, is why the prosecution didn't call those witnesses, right? You, as a defense attorney, you don't go into a case saying, I'm going to fill the holes of the prosecution, right? And Keith Schiller and some of the other witnesses that were not ultimately called, in our view, should have been called by the prosecution.
Lisa Rubin, this is a level of silliness now that is just beyond what you could expect from any serious lawyer. He lost the case. He lost it. And he didn't call these witnesses. And he obviously didn't call these witnesses because he thought they would do damage to his case.
And he said as much on CNN. I saw that clip earlier today, Lawrence, in part because Andrew called my attention to it through a tweet. And the first thing that struck me was the arrogance of, because this is America, or because we live in America and we don't carry the burden of proof. And yes, that's true. They didn't have the burden of proof. But if they wanted to show the jury that the prosecution didn't meet its burden, they had any number of means to try and demonstrate that. And their answer was solely Bob Costello. As for the rest of his statement, he told on himself when he said, it's not our job to fill the holes in the prosecution's case. That's a concession that had they called Keith Schiller or even the convicted perjurer, Alan Weisselberg, on his second stint at Rikers Island right now, that those people would have aided the prosecution. Saying it's not our job to fill the prosecution's holes was like a staggering admission from Todd Blanche, who I just was gobsmacked by seeing that interview.
Well, you know, Adam, he had a tough time in the courtroom, and I sympathize with lawyers who have bad facts. I sympathize with lawyers in courtrooms who have, you know, there's just nothing they can get up there with and use. They don't really have ammunition. But to get into this freewheeling discussion on CNN and to say that's a question that no defense lawyer should ever be asked. Are you kidding me? That you can't ask a defense lawyer whether he should have called more witnesses?
It didn't make sense. And, you know, Lisa said it all with that. So, you know, I will say one of the most surprising things with me, kind of going back to the trial, was Todd Blanche wasting so much of his time and credibility on the patently absurd argument that these were not reimbursements, after his own client had said in two sworn statements seen by the jury and a tweet that these were reimbursements. That he said that even after there were those two smoking gun documents, he wasted so much time and so much credibility with the jury. With that, it was a pivot point of both his opening statements and his closing arguments. And the fact that was a pivot point of his defense, I think, may explain the speed with which the jury rejected reasonable doubt.